Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today we're taking part in a very complicated and, on the other hand, very interesting section of the April conferences dedicated to some individual issues of social policy. So why it is complicated? During our discussions, we'll have to face some social disadvantages in different forms. And it's not always easy. We'll start with the fact that we go out on Moscow streets, and the Salvation Hangar Foundation was there, and we will walk the paths of homeless people, we'll listen to their stories, and we'll listen to how they got to the streets, how long they have been surviving on their own. Do they have a chance to change their situations? And then from those cold streets of Moscow, we will go to a very far away, hot African country, Ghana specifically. And then the researchers will show us there about some intimate life. Usually, some individuals are not accepted there, and usually it's not a matter of public discussion. So we will find out to which extent in African countries and Ghana itself, violence is widespread, gender violence in different forms. So this is a very sensitive issue as well. And it's not often that we actually see research on this subject. So on the one hand, we have quite a diversified, quite different researchers today. And on the other hand, they are united by the same subject that these are some socially disadvantaged topics. I don't know yet how we are going to comprehend it, maybe through social institutions, through values, cultural specifics, through some social trends, and maybe authors will encourage us themselves to analyze those phenomena. We were supposed to have 4 reports today, but due to some circumstances, 2 people could not join us today. That is why we'll have only 2 speakers today, which allows us having more information and having a chance to ask more questions. Today we have a multi-language section, and we have translators working on this session. So we have more time for each speaker now, and please do not rush, don't speed up, which will be easier for translators to do their job and to translate all the details of our ideas and dialogues. I think 20 minutes will be enough for each report. So at 18 minutes, I will tell you that your time is almost up, and then we'll have like 2 or 3 minutes to finalize your speech. And then we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session. So I think we can start. And our colleagues who are helping us with the translation ask to pay your attention that at the bottom of the Zoom program, you can see an option, choose the language. So each reporter needs to choose his or her channel. If the person is speaking in Russian, then he needs to choose the Russian language. If the person is speaking in English, then he chooses the English language. And then the speaker stays with the same channel till the end of the conference. So let's get it started. And our first report is dedicated to homeless people on Moscow streets. Tatiana, the floor is yours. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen? So we see the screen right now. Today I'm going to speak about a research that was made by the Religious Social Laboratory held last year. It was part of a big presidential grant by the Milosrdie Foundation that the foundation received to study the efficiency of their programs and to somehow enhance their effectiveness. Here we have 4 co-authors, and I'm the only person presenting right now, but there were 4 people involved in this project, and even more, since our research was a survey in the Salvation Hangar. This is a place in the center of Moscow, not far from the center of Moscow, where each person can come and seek some assistance. It's a daytime center. You cannot like sleep and stay overnight, but starting from 8 a.m., any person can come there, have some food, seek medical assistance, have some clothes, and even get tickets home. We have worked in the hangar from February to August 2019, and over this period, we surveyed 702 people. So with each person, we had an interview with a questionnaire. We have prepared 81 questions. So the principle for the interview was the following. An interviewer came up to a person and just asked him questions from the questionnaire. Homeless people did not fill out any questionnaires themselves because it might be too complicated. So it took us from 20 minutes to 1 hour to fill out one survey ourselves. Generally, we had 19 people who interviewed the homeless people. Now you can see some photos of the Salvation Hangar. This is a backyard, and this part of the building that you can see, this is actually the Center for Orthodox Charity. Behind it, there is a small yard where you can come and where homeless people come who need help. This is the entrance to the center, and the photo you see right now is like there's been a lot of people in the hangar. It can accommodate only 50 people at the same time. So all those 50 people were already inside, and all the others had just to wait outside, which is not really convenient, but it cannot function otherwise. This is the interior of the camp, just plastic chairs, and behind the photographer, there is a table with a supervisor. You can address to that person. Passing this tent, you go out. This is sort of a yard with a shower, with bathrooms, and also some houses for the staff. This is indeed quite a small area, quite dense. So in summer, it's a little bit better because you can stay outside on the benches. Our objective was to understand who are actually the people coming to the hangar. How did they find themselves there and what they need? On this slide, you can see a portrait of a typical homeless person, which is a male, 85%, of average age, lonely person, and usually he has never been married. This is a Russian citizens, but we also found citizens from other countries. This person came from a different region. Most of them have secondary vocational education. Part of them has higher education. And they became homeless either when they came to Moscow or because in Moscow, over some period of time, they just found themselves homeless. So the most common story is that when a person comes from some province to look for a job, most probably he finds some kind of a job at the construction site or as a worker. And after some time, the bad employer says goodbye to him, kicks him out, and the person is on the street. Very often he doesn't have a passport, he has some problems. And we've outlined the types of homeless people. We've tried separating them into groups using 2 principles. The first one is answering the question, how long have you been on streets? And the second one is it the first time that you are on the street? So when was the first time you got there? As there was a certain number of people who found themselves on the streets not for the first time. So the question is, itself, how long have you been on the street, was not really correct. And we forgot to include the question in our questionnaire on do you have a place to live? Because some of the people in the hangar, they actually had some residential property. Maybe these are people who live in some dormitory for workers, so they come to the hangar just to get some clothes. But many of them really didn't have any place to stay. So having analyzed those two factors, we subdivided our respondents into 3 groups. So these groups split in equal parts, around 30% in each group, and we called them newcomers, pendulums, and stuck. So I'm going to speak about each of the group. As for the age, so just briefly, I'll tell you about the differences between the groups. Newcomers are those who have been on the street for less than a month, and that's their first or second time on the street. Pendulums are those who find themselves on streets regularly, and the stuck are those who have lived on the streets for more than 8 months. So the age group, newcomers and pendulums are very close in terms of age, and the stuck group includes more senior people. It's 46 years and over. As for the marital status and some kind of family or relatives, among the pendulums, there is the most part of those who have family. So mainly those are people who do have families in the regions, in some province like Moscow suburbs, like Vladimir Oblast, Kaluga. And those people are coming constantly to Moscow to look for a job, and every time they find themselves in this situation. 1/3 of them have never been married, and a lot of them are widowed. So how they responded to questions regarding the parents? Most of them do not have any relatives. So usually those are people who have lost their family capital. They do not have any family connections. However, there are also those who found themselves on streets because they were kicked out by their parents, by their wife, or for example, a mother dies and the relatives kick this person out. A considerable part of the respondents have some property, like own some property, but some of them cannot live there. Some of them are going to come back because they just have some house where their family lives, but there's no possibility to make money there. That's why we have a question. We call those people homeless, but the word homeless is actually, that does not describe them well, because as you can see among newcomers, more than half of the respondents had some kind of property in ownership. So how did these people actually find themselves on the streets? The most common answer was that they were victims of a fraud, both of employers and criminals who take away your apartment and make you renounce your apartment yourself. The second place is some difficult situations with your family members, and then sold the apartment and didn't buy a new one. Of course, there were some people that didn't fit in the statistics. They were individuals who just were released from the jail, those who just come to Moscow because they are just interested in Moscow, they just want to have a look at Moscow, they just like living there, but they don't manage to do it for a long time, so they come to have some food. And among the stuck group, there is most parts of fraud cases, and among newcomers, mostly there were some problems in the family. So the stuck are people who mostly faced fraudulent activities, so they were deceived, offended by someone. So now they don't have any stimulus to come back to life. The hunger staff said that sometimes their lawyers manage to help those people, for example, get their apartments back. But that's a very difficult work to do, and not everyone is ready to proceed with it. Newcomers, even if they were kicked out by their relatives, well, of course, among newcomers, there's potentially stuck homeless. But a lot of them actually want to change the situation. They are ready to find a job. They are ready to go somewhere. And a lot of them come to the hangar to increase their attractiveness on the market. Because it's clear that a person who didn't have a place to sleep, who didn't have a chance to call someone, he just doesn't have a chance to find a job, and employers will just not talk to them. The hunger gives them opportunity to change their lives and offer them some employment possibilities. It's not too often, but sometimes it happens. So as I said, newcomers still try to change their situation. 1/4 of them want to come back to their place. So this is a problem. Why many people come to Moscow, face problems, and they do not come back, actually? We think the issue is that most of them still hope to have their share of luck. They think if they manage to come to Moscow, they have more opportunities. And it's easy for them to find their place in Moscow rather than go back to their native land where there is no opportunities. And there is also the issue of shame, because to admit that you've come to Moscow and that you didn't manage to do anything is very hard. So people are ready to live on streets just not to experience this shame and to visit such places as the hangar. So 20% are going to come back home. It doesn't mean that they will not come for the second time to Moscow. Pendulums also want to take some actions, and they think that in this situation, only they are responsible for their own future. So those are people who have seen what life is all about. They are familiar with the laws of homeless life. So they want to get out of it, but not everyone have a chance to do it. The stuck group are very pessimistic. They do not want to take any measures, and more often than others, they believe in God. Most probably this is not because those people are actually religious. That was a question that sounded, who or what can help you in your situation? So the respondents had some answers like you, the state, your relatives, and faith in God. So people actually said, yes, only God could help us. This is just some belief in some chance, in fortune, and absence of belief in all the other institutes. And those people have much worse situation with their health. Most of them said that they could have the status of a disabled person, but not everyone can do it because it's complicated procedure and not everyone is ready to take those steps to have the disabled status. And they come to the hangar to just heat up, to have food, and they don't look for a job, and they don't look for opportunities to go back home. This slide you will see what could be the trajectory, like the patterns for each group. Above the line, you can see normal life, and below the line are our respondents. The objective of the hunger is to make the newcomers leave the streets and not move to other groups. And pendulums need to stop enjoying their current life. They need to be encouraged to find some stable income, stable grounds. And the stuck group, they cannot get out of it. So probably there's other candidates for some other projects of Milosrdye Foundation. They're going, for example, to organize a farm out of the city limits. So homeless people will be relocated to this farm where they can work and provide themselves. There are such projects in in other organizations. And part of them are not actually ethical, they're not actually helping others, but they're just holding those advertising campaigns. So we need to have some more work done with the stuck group, not just helping them to survive. Because usually they have their basic needs satisfied. So basically this is the end of my presentation. The results of this research have already been drafted, and the Salvation Hangar is changing its structure of assistance. So we also gave some comments, and they were also considered for the future. I hope this research will be continued because I was personally very much interested in how those people fit into the paths into the routes around the city, and why some charity organizations have quite smooth operational procedures like Salvation Hangar, and why other organizations have problems with it. So this is the subject for our future research. Thank you very much. I think now we can move to your questions. I'm sure you will have a lot of them. I see that Elena has a question, and I give the floor to you.
Ага, я поняла. Елена Станиславовна сейчас не может озвучить, поэтому я тогда озвучу ее вопрос.
So Elena doesn't have her mic on. She asks, how do you assess the share of professional homeless? How did you verify the responses, considering that homeless people know how to make you pity them? We had a question like, how did you try to make money over the recent time? And many of them think that asking for money is humiliating. So they didn't ask for money. They just did some minor jobs, like giving out leaflets near the metro. But part of them actually called it not money begging, had a more positive attitude towards it and didn't call it money begging, but called it something like so when they were asked how you make money, they said we just collected money near the metro. So I can now look through the data I have, but it's certainly less than a half. And less than a half consider it acceptable for them to beg for money. So among the hangar visitors, actually look like professional money beggars and behave like this, but the majority still, they don't have these stereotypes of a typical homeless person who sleeps somewhere on the street and begs for money professionally. In most cases, these are actually people who got into a serious, difficult situations, and they want to help themselves, but don't always find the way. Any other questions?
Пока тишина, вот у меня есть вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста.
So I do have a question. Can we say that these Russians are excluded, socially excluded group that are like pushed to this way of life due to some institutional limitations? Or these are more like some stories of a personal choice, values, culture? So it's hard to call them a group. They are very different. Part of them are people who, like originally, they were excluded from the society. Part of them are people with mental issues who when they were teenagers, were engaged in some criminal activities. But a lot of them are people who actually want to do something bigger. For example, if a person comes to Moscow from Vladimir region to make money, so based on his place of residence, this is a person who actually wants to be successful, who wants to do something bigger. And he's not in this place because something is wrong with him, but because we do not have a well-developed scheme of punishment of those bad employers. So if an employer doesn't pay his workers, he will not be punished, and that's the problem. Considering the classification that you have developed, is it possible to apply it somehow to enhance the social policy measures for the benefit of those citizens, considering that there's those pendulums, the stuck group? Can we differentiate social measures towards them based on this classification? Yes, we do hope that we can apply it not only in the hangar. We spoke at conference with the same research where we had representatives of other organizations. So my colleagues in St. Petersburg, I also talked to them, and they understand the situation very well. So in our perfect world, it's going to result in this. We understand that now it's difficult times, and maybe will not help everyone. But the idea that there is different levels and low and high levels of help, we can help some people right now, we can help some people in the future. We do have this confidence. Even at the state level, we try speaking about it. Dear colleagues, do you have any more questions?
Вот мне пока еще мы думаем, хотелось бы, знаете, какой вопрос задать? Скажите, вообще, на ваш взгляд, так как вы больше всего из нас погружены в эту тематику...
So, as you are more engaged in this subject, what is the ratio of social policy by policy of state authorities and policy of non-commercial organizations? So those who give food to people at railway stations, who organize all those centers, they are all non-commercial organizations. They're very different. And as this state state center where you can have a sleep, it's in some distant area of Moscow. And also state companies often target the city citizens. For example, in this Marina center, you can stay there overnight only if you have Moscow residence permit, if you are registered in Moscow. It means that the state is doing something, but compared to the non-commercial sector, and there's quite a lot of small organizations as well, and churches are also helping, both Protestant and Orthodox churches, but mainly it's big organizations who give assistance. We haven't studied the issue of social patrol, and now we are thinking on what to do next. And we consider the issues of research in social patrol.
Как закреплена вот эта сеть информирования бездомных о том, где
How
они
this network of information is organized? How do homeless people find out where they can get help, find a job? So this is an interesting question because the hangar, it's not far from the center and not far from the Kursky railway station. It's very hard to find this hangar. To reach it, you actually need to make some efforts. And Milosrdye Foundation each year publishes a reference book for homeless, which you can have with you, take it with you, and find the route to those organizations. However, volunteers who give food, very often they can give you some advice. So organizations are aware of each other's operations and they can refer people to each other. So what do you think about having detoxification centers back? What's your opinion? I don't really have an opinion about the return of detoxification centers. We do not admit drunk people to the hangar, but I cannot actually comment. I don't have any opinion about this.
Можно еще вопрос?
Пожалуйста.
Скажите, пожалуйста, профессиональный состав этих людей вы исследовали?
So have you researched the occupations of those homeless people? Because a lot of them do have some profession, they used to work somewhere, so maybe they have education. And at a certain stage of their life, they just lost everything. Or since the beginning, they just turned the wrong way. We had a question about occupation and how long have you been employed at your last job. Most of them have secondary vocational education and some are like they are workers, builders, electricians, so some manual jobs. So probably they could have settled down. But as it turns out, it's not so easy. And charity organizations try to improve this contact between the employment organizations and the hangar. But the majority of people just do not look for such job. We also had a question on what would you like to do in life? And actually not everyone is ready. A lot of them want to be security guards because you just sit and watch TV, don't do anything. So very often there's some kind of event that leads to this situation. Either a relative dies or something drastic happens in your life. Some people start telling their stories and they said that it all happens when some event occurred. And a lot of young people have this vague job. They say, I just went to some university, studied some management, so I don't know what to do with all of it. Because in Moscow, they are not competitive. So we cannot say that they're all different. And people who have higher education, they are not in demand in the society, or it's some personal tragedies that's connected with occupation. So probably due to some personal circumstances, they don't have this internal resource to look for a job. So they are at this stage when they just cannot send a CV, they cannot come to an interview. So of course, more senior citizens say that, well, young people have more probability to get this job. But there were no people like over 40 who had a higher education and who wanted to work. So they treated this education as something not obligatory. They may say that I do have higher education, but I don't feel like being an engineer. So we have one more question.
Здравствуйте, спасибо большое за возможность
Good
задать
afternoon, dear
вопрос.
colleagues.
Ну,
Thank you
во-первых,
very
конечно,
much
Татьяна,
for
большое
the
спасибо, очень
opportunity.
интересное исследование. Я как
Thank you,
экономист и
Tatiana. It was a
юрист,
very
на самом
interesting
деле,
research. As an
интересуюсь
economist
и
and a
этой
lawyer,
стороной жизни,
I'm very
как
much
относятся
interested in this side of
москвичи
our life,
к
how
приезжим,
Moscow
очень часто
citizens treat
попрошайкам, и как
newcomers and
относятся
very often money beggars,
сами попрошайки, да, к
and
жизни.
how
И вот
money
меня
beggars
интересует вопрос,
treat
узнавали
life.
ли вы? Может быть, им
So did you
нравится быть
ask them?
попрошайками?
Maybe
Почему
they do like
спрашиваю?
to be
Потому
homeless.
что сама общалась
I'm
через
asking
социальный
because
патруль.
through the
Каким
social
образом?
patrol organization,
Когда
I
я звоню в
communicated
социальный
with them.
патруль и говорю, что
When I
там
call the
находится
social
человек,
patrol
просит
and tell
милостыню,
them
видимо,
that
ему
I can see a
сейчас
money
тяжело, и
beggar,
нужно
a homeless
обязательно
person,
помочь.
he's
Они,
probably in
безусловно,
a hard
присылают,
situation and you need to
приезжают.
help him.
Вот я сама в
They
Марьино
certainly
живу,
come.
но они приезжали и на Дмитровское шоссе,
So the
то есть
patrol
на
comes
Петровское,
to different locations in
Тимирязевское, Петровское,
Moscow,
Разумовское. И у них есть правило
and
обязательно
they have a
отзваниваться.
rule.
Да? Когда я звоню,
They
даю заявку,
make a
оставляю свой
call.
телефон,
So
и
when
они
I leave a
после
request, I leave my
встречи с
phone number,
попрошайками обязательно
and
мне
after they
перезванивают
meet
и
the homeless
рассказывают, что и
person, they
как.
call me
И
back
вот
and
очень
tell me
часто
what
они говорят
happened.
о том, что попрошайкам
And very often
нравится
they
быть
say that these
попрошайками.
homeless people
Многие из
actually
них
enjoy being
имеют
homeless.
пенсию, да,
Many of them
они
have
молодые,
retirement
но
benefits.
ушли на пенсию,
They are
потому что
quite
имели,
young, but they retired
видимо,
because
деятельность, связанную с вредным производством,
they
или
had
же
some kind
получили
of
инвалидность,
dangerous
получают
jobs,
пенсию по
or they are
инвалидности. Ну и,
disabled and
соответственно,
receive
им
disabled
нравится попрошайничать, потому
allowances.
что не
So
хватает
they
этой
enjoy these
пенсии.
homeless
А здесь, в
activities
Москве,
because
люди богатые,
retirement
люди добрые, всегда
allowances
подадут.
is
И не
enough. And
только
in Moscow, the
деньги,
citizens
это
are
могут
rich. They
быть
will share
и
money with you.
алкогольные
It's
напитки,
not
это могут
about
быть и
money.
еда, ну и,
They can share
соответственно, на
some food,
природе,
alcohol,
с друзьями,
beverages,
потому что они
and then they
как-то
spend time
друг с другом очень
outside
хорошо
with their
общаются,
friends. They
может
have
быть,
like
вместе
good
приезжают,
communication with
может быть,
each
здесь
other. Maybe
знакомятся.
they even
Ну
come
и
together.
им нравится, вот сейчас сезон
So
начинается, я
they
думаю, они будут
enjoy.
везде. Конечно,
Now
когда я
we're at
звоню,
the
патруль
beginning of the
приезжает
season.
и просит
So when I
их,
call
да,
the social
может быть,
patrol,
есть специальные места,
when
где
they
можно
come,
помыться, они об этом
and
рассказывают,
maybe they tell
адрес
them that there are
называют,
some locations where they
предлагают
can take a shower.
решить проблему. Вот у нас на остановке был
So they offer
человек,
them
и
some solutions.
его уже нет.
It's
То
just we
есть,
had some
возможно, в
homeless
тяжелой
person at
ситуации
the bus station,
оказался,
and now
ему
we don't see
помогли,
him. So
переселили,
probably
может быть,
he was
наоборот, эту
helped
проблему
somehow.
решили. Я тоже
Maybe
всегда
he was
спрашиваю, как юрист, может быть,
relocated.
вам помочь?
I
Около метро
always ask
стояла
them as a
женщина, меня,
lawyer,
говорит,
do you
дочка
need help?
выгнала. Я говорю, может
I
быть,
saw a
поговорить
woman
с
once near
дочкой,
the
может быть,
metro,
через
and she told me
какие-то
that her
органы
daughter kicked her out.
воздействовать на
So I
человека.
told her,
Нет,
maybe
нет,
you
нет,
should
не
talk to
надо,
your
мне
daughter
достаточно, вот
or
я
go
сейчас
to some
соберу милостыню, вот
authorities.
этих денег
So
мне
this lady said that
достаточно. То есть чем
it's okay, the money I beg
хуже
for
выглядит
is enough.
попрошайка или
So the
притворяется таким,
worse
тем
the
больше он
appearance of such
зарабатывает.
homeless
И
person, the more
получается,
money he generates.
патруль говорит мне,
So the social
если
patrol
они
tells me,
соглашаются, мы их
if they
отвозим. Если не
agree, we
соглашаются,
bring
мы
them to
ничего
our
сделать не
center. If
можем.
they don't
Потому
agree, we
что
do not do
здесь
anything,
может что-то сделать исключительно скорая
because
помощь.
only
Сейчас в
the
ее видении
emergency services
этот
can do
вопрос
something.
находится.
The
А вот
emergency services are
если бы это
responsible
было
for
как
it.
раньше МВД видение,
And
то те
if it
обязательно
was the
приезжают,
Ministry of the
насильным
Interior, as it
образом,
used to
да,
be, they
отвозят
came
в медвотрезвитель,
and
где
they
дают
enforced
сутки, там
people
сколько кому
to
нужно,
detoxification centers.
выспаться, помыться,
And there
ну
a
и,
person takes
соответственно,
a shower, sleeps,
профилактика преступления, правонарушений,
and
рассказывают, как
this is
жить
kind of
можно,
a
как жить
prevention of
нельзя, наверное,
crimes
все-таки.
because people
И
are
человек,
told
возможно,
how
на
they
это
should and shouldn't
среагирует. Возможно,
behave, and maybe a
решат
person will react to
проблему
it. So
именно
maybe they will
путем да,
solve their
помощи.
problem.
И, соответственно, сегодня, когда некуда везти, скорая
So
помощь уже
today,
не
as there
приезжает,
is no such
добрая воля
detoxification
остается
centers,
основной волей. Если не
the
хотят,
goodwill
значит,
is the
продолжают
only
на
salvation.
солнышке отдыхать, выпивать,
If these people
закусывать.
are not willing
И,
to go
соответственно,
anywhere, they just stay where
единственное,
they
что
are
радует, это то, что они
outside.
переезжают. Да? Видимо,
And
когда им
the only
говорят,
good
вот
thing is that
жители данного
they
района
relocate.
обратили на
When they
на
get
вас
told
внимание,
that
вызвали
the
нас,
neighbors
они понимают, что
called the
надо куда-то
social patrol, they
переместиться.
understand that they
Вот
need
этим
to
дело и
relocate.
заканчивается. Я вижу,
Прервать.
просто
Возникла техническая проблема.
So we had some technical difficulty.
Если можно, нажмите, пожалуйста,
Could you please
на
press
перевод,
the translation button?
потому что сейчас ваш язык идет параллельно с переводчиком. Переводчика не слышно.
Because currently we have the wrong channel.
есть у меня перевод.
Да, перевод, и вот там нужно выбрать канал русский.
So could you please choose the Russian channel?
Хорошо, я выбрала.
Да, у нас завершение дискуссии давайте...
So we have 2 minutes to finalize the discussion. So thank you very much for this question. This is the other side of the story. You said that homeless people make quite good money, and probably a person who selected this, who made this choice, he will not come to the hangar because he will make more money begging for money. And most probably these are different kinds of people. So probably we are over. In the end of our discussion, we can go back to your topic if we have some questions. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. So now we are going to our report number 2. We are going to a totally different universe. Bamidele, I give the floor to you.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. I need to share my screen now. Okay, so sorry for that. Yeah, this is what I want to show. So good evening to everyone. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Bamidele Emmanuel Ola. I'm a student at the Doctoral School of Sociology, Higher School of Economics, Moscow, Russia. And I'm in the 3rd year. My interest into researching this began during my master's studies at the HSE Moscow, when I started investigating factors that predispose women or that are associated with women's experience of intimate partner violence, and in Africa, beginning with Nigeria, my country, and then trying to compare with other countries. So my PhD study is actually centered on investigating factors that are persistently associated with intimate partner violence against women. You see, intimate partner violence is a very important and sensitive topic. And I think a lot of women are suffering in their lives and they don't know how to come out of it. So it is important for we, I think, as researchers, to actually bring to public the private lives of these women. This is not feminism, so to speak, but it is a very important topic, especially for social policy implications. So today I will be looking at the aspect of the attitudes of men towards intimate partner violence in Ghana, precisely. And what motivated this, like I said, during my master's studies with one of our professors, Professor Vladimir Koslov, and Katya also was one of my teachers then. So we really had a good time having a lot of discoveries. So I persisted into this. And let's look at this picture. And may I say, afore that, I will be showing a lot of pictures which would help you to understand what this is all about. And my hope is that this kind of study would also be replicated in Russia. I want to see, because statistics has shown that the global prevalence of violence against women, even in Russia. So I want to see this kind of study, not just in some other countries. I think we should also replicate it, if possible, in Russia. So that is why I'm presenting it in this conference, and I would also like to get feedback from you. May I say that this paper is already submitted is an original paper and is under consideration for a Q1 publication. So this picture is a very common one. Why men beat their wives? So the question is why? Most studies try to look at the why from the aspect of the women. And so they look at women's socioeconomic characteristics, demographics, maybe she's poor, she's dependent on the man. But very few studies have actually investigated the factors that are associated with men's tolerance for wife beating. As I'm going to show, So intimate partner violence, IPV for short, is a global public health pandemic, and it has strong social policy implications. 1/3 of women globally are believed to have suffered one form of intimate partner violence or the other. Intimate partner violence can be physical violence, like kicking, slapping, pushing, dragging, pulling her hair, even using weapons against her. It could also be sexual, when a woman is forced to have or engage in sexual intercourse against her wish, and of like what we call marital rape. And it could also be emotional, like when a man threatens the woman, and it could also be economic violence, like when a man deprives a woman the necessary economic assistance that she needs, or her children, or even threatens to hurt her or hurt someone who she loves, so, or that she cares about. So numerous studies have shown that the main reasons why men perpetrate violence against their wives is because men believe it is right to do so. So my question is flipping the coin. Why do men believe it is right to do so? What factors motivate men's acceptance into believing that beating a woman, is justified? And how has this persisted across time and, like periods of time? So I will be looking at different waves of data. So IPV trend studies available reported that acceptance is declining globally. Yes, more than ever before, we know from studies that men are less likely to justify wife beating. Yes, but they have hardly shown the trend and the factors that are contributing to this rejection of tolerance towards wife beating across the time. So if you look at this data, this is physical violence or physical security of women. We see that the red part actually shows where violence against women is high. And we could see this is Russia, and we see Nigeria here, and we see Ghana, faintly light. This is Ghana somewhere here, like faintly light, but it still prevails in Ghana. And so when we go deeper, we see 37%, so to speak, second only to Asian countries. We see the prevalence of intimate partner violence by region. This is reported by the World Health Organization in 2010. So trend studies so when I decided to look into literature to see what papers are actually saying about why men beat their wives, it was very scarce to find papers. Of course, I did find trend studies. I'm talking about trend studies now. The first one was done in Egypt, and the second one was done in Nigeria. However, these studies only involved women samples. They asked the women why they think they are beaten, right? They don't ask the men. So this is still a large gap in scholarship. Pierotti actually studied men and women and came up with some findings, which I may talk about. So I just want to hasten up. A study in Nepal by Yoshikawa et al. Found that Yoshikawa was interested in understanding why men beat their wives, not just beat their wives, but also perpetrate sexual or emotional violence against them. But in this study was mainly against about physical intimate partner violence. And he was trying to compare the attitudes of women towards violence and its actual occurrence compared to the attitude of men and the actual occurrence. So the interest was to see whether when women tolerate violence, they experience it in their personal lives, or when men, their husbands, actually tolerate it, then it happens. And the result was outstanding. They found that whether women support violence or not, they experienced it. But consistently, men's attitude towards partner violence was what mattered. So if a man decides to beat or not to beat, decides to perpetrate violence or not to perpetrate violence, actually goes a long way. It was statistically significant despite controlling for other factors. So this is a social policy issue. So my study, what am I interested in? I'm interested in understanding the national prevalence, the trends and the patterns in men's attitude towards wife beating across 3 waves of data. So I'm going to look at Ghana, I'm going to see the attitude of the men in the past progressively across 3 data and the factors at each level that actually predispose them to having acceptance attitude or tolerant attitude towards white beating. Then I'm going to pick this data, which I think can also be replicated in regions of Russia or elsewhere. Then I disaggregate the data by regions. Okay, I look at the patterns through the regions, then by rural and urban residents. Okay, so I explore personal, socio-cultural, and community level factors that are significantly associated with men's acceptance of white beating from 2003 to 2014. So that is the study objective. What literature says? First, Pierotti, which I cited before, said global cultural diffusion. That is, in the new millennium, from the year 2000, she actually studied she used 2 data waves. That's from 2000 to 2005 data across about 26 countries of the world. Then from 2005 to 2010 data, and actually compared them. And the conclusion was that it was as a result of global cultural diffusion, that is from like the Millennium Development Goals that emphasize gender equality. More men and more women are gradually rejecting the acceptance of violence as acceptable, and so they are also because of global. So the summary is that the reason why people are less likely to accept violence against women today is because of global cultural scripts from the United Nations, from the eradication of violence against women and all stuffs. But she could not show us the mechanism by which these are actually perpetrated. So it is basically assumption, and we could not really ascertain it. So in Ghana, studies conducted within Ghana itself, like Chiwa 2018, actually said that the reason why men accept wife beating is because some of them, they engage in risky behaviors and they've also experienced childhood violence. So children, people that experience violence as children will be much more likely to think it is right and so justify it, and when they grow old, they repeat it. Another study by a long list of scholars in Ghana found that collective community attitudes and social gender ideologies, that is when a whole community thinks, well, it is just a normal thing. If a woman does what is wrong to you as a husband, you just kick her, you just slap her, you just deal with her. So social, collective community attitudes really matter. And then Taki and Man found individual and household factors, such as when a man has low education and a lower wealth status, poverty, male dominance in household decision-making processes, and when men are younger. Most of these studies actually involve women than men. So the list is endless, really. And then another study among 17 sub-Saharan countries by Taki and Man, by Utman et al. Rather, that's a kind of, they actually found the same factors, some of the same factors that Taki and Man found in 2006. However, in addition to that, they found that access to media, when men have access to media, they are much more likely to reject violence against women as justified. So what is, I already said I'm interested in understanding Ghana. So my data is the Ghana Demographic and Health Survey data. I will be using I used 3 waves, the 2003, 2008, and 2014 data. And in all, the 2003, we had 13,715 men that were actually studied. And the sampling procedure, it was a nationally representative survey that cuts across both rural and urban regions of Ghana. All the regions, the 10 regions of Ghana as at then. Now Ghana has 16 regions, but then as at the time of the collection of the data, there were 10 regions in Ghana. So all these were actually, it was actually nationally representative, and it involved 2 stages. So where is Ghana on the map of the world? This is, of course, this is Africa. So Ghana is on the western coast of Africa, and these are the regions of Ghana. There are 10 regions stretching from the north down to the south. And what studies have shown us is that the southern part of Ghana are more westernized. They are more westernized as a result of probably colonial legacy compared to the northern part. The northern part is less civilized, and they are less educated, much like the situation we have in Nigeria, so to speak, and a lot of maybe Islamic education prevailing in this northern part of Ghana. So my variables, the dependent variable is attitude, supportive attitude towards wife beating. And this was measured in using five hypothetical scenarios. Of course, there could be so many questions you can ask men, but studies have found that the Kronbach alpha of using this five is usually very high. Like a study I recently, it could be up to 86%, you know. So when you combine this five questions to measure supportive attitude towards wife beating. So men were asked whether it was right to beat a woman in any of these five hypothetical scenarios. So they are asked, is it right for a man to beat his wife if she goes out without telling him a yes or a no? Is it right to beat a woman if she neglects the children? That is talking about a traditional gender roles. So if it is right for a man, the third one, to beat a woman if she argues with him, if it is right for a man to beat his wife if she refuses to have sex with him, and the last question is if it is right for a man to hit or beat his wife if she burns the food. And so you either answer yes or no or don't know. But for this study, I only retain those who answered a yes or no. So I need, when a man answers yes in any of these situations, then is coded 1 to have a binary outcome and to emphasize the zero tolerance. So a man must say no, it's not right to beat a woman if she goes out without telling you, if she neglects the children, if she argues with him, refuses sex, or burns the food. If a man answers no to all this, then he is certified to have zero tolerance. But if he says maybe, yeah, you can beat her if she goes out and says no to all others, a single yes in any of these situations qualifies the man, disqualifies the man from zero tolerance. So the man justifies violence, however. So the key independent variables, I actually plugged, I studied each wave. Then after studying each wave, then I pulled them. Then I controlled for years. I controlled for a year of the DHS to see how it goes over the years. And educational attainment was measured, no education, primary, secondary. Actually, mostly the first category in each of this was used as the reference category. So I control for religion, marital status, just as I've seen in previous literature, household wealth, residence, the access to media, and also control for occupation, region, and residence. So my analysis involved univariate, bivariate, chi-square analysis, and multivariate. So when I do bivariate, I also test it using chi-square. So the independent wave, so the first step in data analysis was independent wave analysis. Then I combine them, like I said, to see the year factor. Then I disaggregate the data by residence and to see whether the urban men more than the rural men. And then I look at the factors within each, compare within each of these residents, within urban, within rural, how the factors vary. So the multivariate logistic regression model was also used. So what are the results? The first, social demographic, we see that, yes, the first bar is 2003, the second is 2008, the third is 2014. What do we see? From people that have no education to those who don't have primary education actually fell. So we see that people who have, this is highest educational attainment, that is the highest education that a man had received. So we see an increase in educational level, really. There's a decrease in illiteracy. There is an increase in education, like from 60% in 2003 to 64%. And the same with higher education. That's people who have tertiary education, also increased from 6% to 11, almost 50%, so to speak. Now, when we come to urban residents, so increasing education levels, we see that there is an evidence. Of course, we could not test this because I did not test the significance really. But we see an increase in urbanization, increasing urbanization in Ghana, and decreasing rural, like the proportion of people in rural regions actually decreased over these years. And then when we look at, we also see increasing Christianization, so to speak. And so let's go to the trends in attitude towards violence across the regions. And this was tested at P level less than 0.5. So we actually see that these regions have very high acceptance, although this region was significant. So when we start with the Western region, across the years, we see truly a kind of increasing rejection of wife beating. Yes, men are less likely across the years, almost 46 or 48%. They are about between 46 to 48% less likely, that's at the national level now, to justify wife beating when you compare 2013, the year 2003, I'm sorry, when you compare 2003 to 2014. So in 2003 at the national level, 32%, but by 2014, it has reduced to 12%. So we actually see that men are less likely. However, I don't think it is easy to say, okay, it is general. So that's why I disaggregated the data. So those who actually by the year 2014, the regions that went ahead above the national average, when you draw a straight line, targeting the national average of 2.4, we see the following regions. These 4 or 5 regions actually, they have acceptance above the national average, with the Upper West having the largest acceptance. 36% of men still believe it is right to beat a woman for as small as burning the food or going out without, telling him or arguing with him or refusing to have sex. And but we see that the region, yes.
Надо потихоньку.
We need to wrap up. We have. Could you please wrap up, because we're almost out of time. Just a couple of minutes will be enough for you to finish.
Oh, so I already used 20 minutes? Okay, let me just round up. Okay, so what
yes, you're running out of time.
Okay, all right, thank you. So what I see is that it's actually falling, right? The acceptance is falling. And if we go by each of the attitudes, if she burns the food, we see that it's actually falling, but it's still high. If she refuses to have sex with him, if she argues with him, if she goes out without telling him, and if she neglects the children, and then the national average. So we actually see that it's actually decreasing. And then the same with urban and rural region, across urban and rural region. So the factors that are actually associated with acceptance of wife beating, across the years, we see that compared to year 2003 as a reference category, the men in year 2014 were less likely to accept wife beating as justified. And we see that this also varied by age. That is when you pull all the years together. This varied by age, and people in polygamous union, men that have more than one wife, they were more likely to accept wife beating for any reason. And then education, we see that education almost brought the least, so to speak, acceptance of wife beating. And then wealth, compared to the rich, we see that the rich were less likely compared to the rich. They were less likely. The rich were less likely compared to the poor, and those in the middle category to accept wife beating. We see that religion does not really play more strong significance. So we see year matters, age matters, polygamy or polygyny matters. Education is negatively associated, year is negatively associated, but polygyny is positively associated. Wealth is negatively associated. Being in traditional is positively associated. And when we look at each year, we see that age still matters in 2003. And so just to summarize, we see that polygyny, education, wealth matters. If you go to the second table, you see that access to media, surprisingly, does not really influence men's attitude. So going on the radio and the television to campaign for men's attitude against violence does not really reduce the likelihood, so to speak. But education is very significant, so to speak. And so summary of findings, men attitude towards violence against women, acceptance of violence against women actually declined by like 42% from 2003 to 2014. However, in 2 regions, there were increase. I couldn't show you that, but I have it in the table because of time. 5 regions, of course, were above the national average, and so much attention should be paid to these regions. And the highest reasons why men believe it was right to beat their wives was when she neglects the children or she goes out without telling him. And education protects from IPV, especially only from secondary education. Media, religion, and occupation were not statistically significant for men's attitude towards wife beating, and men in the northern region. So what are the recommendations? Education is helpful and should be stressed, because the content of the curriculum should involve things that encourage from childhood children to resist violence against women. And then the Marriage Act should prohibit polygyny, because somehow there is a kind of compromise in that. So I think I can stop there if you have any questions. So I'm just presenting this because I think we can actually get some things from here and then also replicate this in some other countries. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much for such an exciting speech. So we have one question which you can actually read in our chat box. So what are the policies of empowerment women acting in Ghana? And how does the social policy contribute to the trends that you've shown?
Yeah, across different countries, I actually need to look at Ghana's specific situation. But across different countries, especially in Africa, there is a high increase in the campaigns against domestic violence. And so there are also non-governmental organizations in Ghana who are also spearheading the call against wife beating in Ghana. So this actually might contribute to some of the factors that increased the likelihood of men's rejection of intimate partner violence in Ghana. However, the current data could not show that, because we couldn't record the number of women or men who have had contact with some of these organizations and actually got information from them. So, but there are on-ground NGOs who are actually canvassing against this kind of attitudes. Thank you.
Спасибо. Коллеги,
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, maybe one of you would like to ask a question. I have a question. Was there any correlation with the religious status of these people? As far as I know, you have a Protestant, Catholic churches, probably Muslims. Was it somehow connected with the religion?
Yeah, the attitudes towards wife beating, it's, you know, this is a very sensitive data and is a very sensitive study. Of course, there are possibilities for social disability in terms of respondents giving you answers that they think you want to answer, whereas they have something else in there. But we just have to trust the responses. So my data does not show actually that religion for Ghana. I'm not a Ghanaian, but it's a sister country. But the data really does not show that religion has any positive or negative association with men's attitude towards wife beating. In other countries, sometimes it does show, but for Ghana, we do not see this. Thank you.
Спасибо. У нас еще есть...
Thank you very much. We have another question from Vladimir Kozlov.
Okay, Bamidele.
Yes, bro.
Daniel, I have one question. It's regarding the dynamics within the years, because you showed that for some years there are some dynamics. For
Yes.
example, with education, there is a clear dynamic, and it looks like that there is some dynamics with religion. I mean, the confession of religion.
Okay.
Denomination, yeah, I'd rather say. So, could you explain why? Could you explain these dynamics for the education and for the denominations? What do you think? What could be the reasons for them?
Okay, for the education and what?
Also for denomination, I saw the dynamics.
Okay, sorry, let me just. Okay, really for education, I think that from what I see in the data, when I wrote this paper, and my conclusion is that I cannot reach a conclusion now that education really has a positive association with rejection. Now, if we look at this, if we look at this trend, of course, we see that when we look at it nationally, we see the role of education that it's actually decreased across the years, right? So from 2003, 2008, 2000. So the higher you go, the less likely you are to support violence against women. But the trend shows that not just education, but secondary education that is meaningful when it comes to reducing attitudes of violence. There was no difference between someone who had only primary education and someone who does not have any education at all, as we see in the table. So that is one. And then for religion, we do not see in two ways, we do not see any relationship between whether you are Catholic or you are other Christians or you are Muslim or you are traditionalist. It is when we pull all the years together, and in 2014 that we see that only traditionalists were much more likely to accept wife beating compared to other Christians. But for other religions, we actually do not see this.
Yeah, but actually what I wanted to comment, because it looks like that the role of the secondary education is going down. Yeah, maybe because there are more and more persons with secondary education. Yes, for higher education, it's definitely something like stable. But for secondary education, you see that the role of the secondary education looks like eroding.
Yeah,
now
that's
we
true.
have sort of the dichotomy, higher education and the other sorts of education.
Exactly. And I could also probably, maybe when I look deep into the data, I could look for the differences between these two and then the Lincoln and then check the statistical significance. But it's very clear that education really matters. And yes, education reduces the likelihood. But if I show that I couldn't, because of I know I wouldn't have enough time, I couldn't show you the trends across rural and urban residents. Then we see that in some rural urban regions education really does not show a significance in reducing. It was not significantly consistent. So, but at the national level, sure, education matters. So policy, more emphasis should be laid on us, especially secondary education and higher education.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Спасибо большое, Владимир и Бамидели. Может, кто-то...
Thank you very much, Vladimir and Bamidele. Maybe someone else has some other questions.
Пока я слушала, у меня лично возникло...
So while I was listening to your speech, I had 3 questions. One of them is very similar with what we've been talking about. So I will ask one of them. So you really dived deeply in the literature and you are very well familiar with it. I mean literature on your subject. So do all the communities that are at the traditional stage of their development, Because very often, you know, in Russia, there is a very huge gap in the level of social economic development between different territories. So this cultural norm, is it characteristic for all the territories, this violence pattern? Can we differentiate the society by territories? And can we say that the way of modernization is like pushing those norms, or there is some other factors that influence the widespread character of those practices?
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting question also. And yes, we have differences across the communities and across the regions, which in fact makes it interesting for me if we could have this study replicated in Russia. I'm very much particular about this because as far as I'm aware, when it comes to data on intimate partner violence across the globe, we don't have so much data for Russia, which could make us to actually look at this. And considering the fact that domestic violence has been decriminalized, so it's very challenging. But for Ghana, if we look at the regions, I just couldn't show yeah. So these are the regions here. These are the regions. So when we look at the regions, we see that some regions compared to Greater Accra, which is actually the capital of Ghana, we see that some regions like the Western and these other regions, they were, in these regions, men were much more likely to justify wife beating. But this is prevalence, right? The factors actually within these regions that could actually explain these dynamics, that's why I controlled for other factors like education and stuff like this. But probably we might have to have a meta or another kind of study that could actually show this. But for me, it was sufficient for me to see both at the bivariate level and also at the multivariate level that across the regions, this is it, yeah. That across the regions, sure, there was a decrease in terms of acceptance of wife beating, which we see, but I was also able to see that like in these two regions, this region and this region, Western region and Upper West region, very close to each other, I was able to see that between 2008 and 2014, the acceptance actually increased. So this is a very interesting one. And here too, from 17% to 90% is very interesting. And that is why we should encourage more studies that focus on the regions rather than just looking at the national level. Because if we look at the national level, we might think that, well, everything is going smoothly, everything is going fine, there is reduction. But when you look at the regions, you now see different patterns. So I think that is important. And then concerning the influence of secularization, yes, the study by Pierotti, like I said, she couldn't show how. So it was this first study. So it was left to assumption. And then she actually did some cohort analysis and showed us that, well, we could say because of the large scale rejection of wife beating across the two waves that she did between 2000 to 2005 and between 2005 to 2010, and we could well say that it's because of the global diffusion from the West, right? On Ghanaians, on Nigerians, and not just Nigerians, across the globe. So she said this is why men were much more likely to reject wife beating, but we do not see the mechanism. And so we can only say tentatively that yes, there is a global cultural diffusion and extending the world system theory. So that is it.
Спасибо большое. У меня еще короткий такой вопрос.
Thank you very much. I also have a brief question, which is similar to what was asked by Elena, similar to our first question. What are the social policy measures that can decrease this phenomena? Is it like outdoor advertising? Is it sort of propaganda? Because you say that with the increase in the education level, the number of those who practice violence is decreasing. Is it because there is some kind of propaganda in schools? Or is it just people are diving into a totally different environment? So how do we see the decrease? Maybe there is some social workers who come to families. What is being done at the social policy level? Where maybe you can give us an example of Western countries' practices that we could implement in Ghana.
Oh, thank you very much for this very interesting question. Yeah, you know, the problem with this kind of study, like I said, again, is still data. Yes, the data is, so the study is limited really in showing the contribution of non-governmental organization or social welfare or social workers who go from door to door. If there is, I do not think there is anything like this in Ghana, based as far as I'm concerned, but I do know that and also, the statistics really shows that it's, I'm sorry to say, because I did not only find this, other studies actually found this, that going to the media to campaign against acceptance of white beating is just not rewarding. It wasn't rewarding. It brought no reward. So like the study by in 17 sub-Saharan African countries by Utman et al. I think I showed that in my literature review. This study, okay, this study, the fifth study. So they studied 17 sub-Saharan African countries, and they saw that access to media, of course, increased. Oh, access to media in their study. But there are other studies that I saw that access to media was not just statistically significant. And in my own study, confirming what some of the previous studies have found, access to media was not statistically significant. Like we see here, this is media. Just a minute. I'm sorry, I just had to show all this. Yeah, this here, up here, you see, across, whether you pull all the factors together, except when you do a simple logistic regression, probably you could see some positive correlation, some negative correlation to acceptance. But when you control for other factors, the access to media does not just appear. And when we say access to media, there are 3 ways of measuring access to media. 3 variables were put. One, the frequency of listening to radio, the frequency of watching television, and then accessibility to printed journals, to printed materials like newspapers, magazines, bulletins, and stuff like that. So they were not really significant when it comes to discouraging men's acceptance of white beating. And may I say that this study did not look at men beating women, why men beat women. Rather, it looked at why men think it is right to beat women. So that is what I found. So I think, yes, there could be other factors on the ground, on local factors, and the influence of westernization, but we could not control for it as a result of data limitation. But I believe that these factors are actually useful and are working towards discouraging men. And in addition to that, I would recommend that I cannot recommend that media should be used because I do not see it. But I can recommend that, of course, we could use social networks, we could use maybe social media rather than television, newspaper, and because how many people watch television these days? So, but the fact that the media did not account for social media. So social media could go a long way in this current century. So I think that would be good. And then some non-governmental organizations. And then social policy in Ghana concerning polygamy is still relatively weak. Polygamy should be discouraged by act, should be discouraged by the law. But as far as I'm concerned, in the northern regions of Ghana, just like in the northern regions of Nigeria, men could still marry as many wives as they wanted. Thank you.
Спасибо вам большое, коллеги.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do you have any more questions? So I see that you're silent. Maybe we could wrap up our discussion. I was extremely interested in both reports, and I really enjoyed diving into those two complicated stories. So thank you very much, dear speakers. I thank everyone who has taken part in our discussion, which was indeed very productive. And I wish our researchers further luck in their studies. So I hope that, Bamidele, you will have a very successful defense of your PhD degree, and your results will lead you to big success in your country, that it will help change the situation. So dear Tatiana, I also wish you good luck in the research of your subject. I hope that in Russia we'll see the decrease of homeless people, and we'll develop some social policy measures who will help those people integrate. So maybe our speakers would like to make some comments, or if there is anything else you would like to share, please do. I would like to thank everyone for an excellent organization for translation, and I would like to thank everyone who has come today. I didn't expect to have such a big audience, and thank you very much personally for being such a good host. So in this case, we can say goodbye to each other. I hope that we will see each other soon at some other sections to discuss some other interesting topics. Daria, thank you very much for coordinating this event, and thanks to our colleagues who provided the translation for us.